On the surface, everything seemed perfect in our family. My sister, Lily, and I grew up in a big house in the suburbs with a mother who, in her way, always made sure we had everything we could want. She was the embodiment of sacrifice, putting herself last for the sake of us. But there were always subtle hints, things I noticed growing up, things I couldn't quite place but knew, deep down, that something wasn't right. It wasn't until I stumbled upon my mother's hidden will that everything I thought I knew about my family was turned upside down. It all started on a rainy Saturday afternoon when my mother was out running errands. I had been going through old family photos in the attic, something I'd been putting off for years. The attic was a cramped space, filled with boxes of forgotten memories and old furniture. As I dug through the piles, I came across a dusty file tucked behind an old dresser. Curiosity piqued. I opened it to find papers I didn't recognize. My mother's handwriting, unmistakable in its neat, precise form. My eyes scanned the page, and my heart skipped a beat when I realized it was a will. But not the one I had ever seen. Lily had always been the golden child. She was the one my mother doted on, the one who could do no wrong. She was the perfect daughter, the one who followed the rules, achieved high marks in school, and did everything by the book. I was the quieter one, the one who often felt overlooked, a shadow in the background. Our mother's love, though abundant, always seemed to flow more freely toward Lily. I accepted it because, well, that's just how it was. Or at least, that's what I told myself. But finding that will changed everything. The document was a second will, one that had been signed a few months ago. I was in shock as I read it. It was clear, it was direct, and it was devastating. My mother, it seemed, had decided to leave everything to Lily. Everything. The house, the savings, the investments, all of it. And me? I was barely mentioned. The will stated that, upon my mother's passing, Lily would inherit everything, and I would be given a small sum to help me get on my feet. It was as if I had been an afterthought in her life. I didn't know what to feel. Anger, confusion, betrayal. But what hit hardest was the realization that I had spent my whole life believing in something that was nothing but a lie. I thought back to all the years I had watched my mother shower Lily with gifts, praise, and attention. Lily was always the first to get the new car, the designer clothes, the college tuition paid in full. I was the one who worked part-time jobs to pay for my own things. I was the one who quietly put my own dreams on hold to help out at home, to make sure things were running smoothly. My mother's love had always felt conditional, as if I had to prove myself worthy of it. But Lily? She was the chosen one, the one who didn't need to prove anything. I sat there, frozen in place, holding the will in my hands, feeling the weight of it pressed down on me. How had I not seen this before? How had I allowed myself to stay in the background for so long, accepting the scraps of affection my mother gave me while Lily took center stage? I had always justified it, telling myself that it was just the way our family was. But now, the truth was staring me in the face, and it was too painful to ignore. I knew I had to confront my mother about it, but I didn't know where to begin. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I had been holding in for years. There was a rage building inside me, a hurt so deep that it felt like it would never go away. The will wasn't just a legal document. It was a symbol of everything I had never been able to say, everything I had never been able to express. My mother had always given Lily everything. She had always chosen her. I was nothing more than a distant, unnoticed presence in my own family. The sound of the front door opening snapped me out of my thoughts. My mother was home. My heart began to race. I hadn't planned what to say, hadn't prepared myself for the confrontation, but I knew it was time. It was time to stop being invisible, time to stop letting my mother's favoritism control my life. I waited, barely breathing, as she entered the room, her arms full of shopping bags. She looked at me, her eyes full of surprise, as if she didn't expect to find me there. I couldn't hold it in anymore. The words spilled out in a rush, accusing and desperate. I asked her about the will, about everything I had just discovered. Her face froze, her hands shaking slightly as she set the bags down. For a moment, there was only silence. She looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes, a flicker of guilt, maybe, or shame. But before she could say anything, I added, almost in a whisper, how I had always been overlooked, how I had always been the one who wasn't good enough. My mother tried to explain, tried to justify her actions, but the words were hollow. She told me she didn't want to hurt me, that she had always done what she thought was best, that Lily had always been more responsible, more capable. But the truth was out now, and no explanation could undo the damage that had been done. As I stood there listening to her excuses, I realized that it didn't matter what she said anymore. The bond one had once believed we shared was gone, shattered by a document I had never even known existed. I left the house that day, the will still clenched in my hand. The pain in my chest was unbearable, but it wasn't just because of the will. It was because I had finally seen my mother for who she truly was, someone who had always favored one child over the other, someone who had never truly seen me for who I was. And now I had to face the truth. I had spent my entire life trying to earn a love that was never really mine to begin with. The days that followed were a blur. I couldn't bring myself to go back to the house, to face my mother or Lily. I didn't want to be anywhere near them. I spent my time going through my mother's things, trying to figure out what I could salvage from the wreckage of my life. But everything felt tainted. Everything felt like a lie. I was nothing more than a pawn in a game I didn't even know I was playing. As I sat in my small apartment, staring at the will, I knew I couldn't let this go. I couldn't just accept that I had been erased from my family's history. I had to take action. I had to find a way to make sure my voice was heard, to make sure my mother and sister understood the cost of their actions. I wasn't sure how I would do it, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. The truth had come to light, and now I had to decide what to do with it. The days following that moment felt like a blur of disbelief and confusion. I had never imagined that the love I had worked so hard to earn, love that had always seemed conditional, always given to me with a heavy dose of sacrifice and expectation, would turn out to be a carefully constructed illusion. I couldn't sleep at night, the sting of the will burning in my mind like a fire I couldn't put out. The anger I felt for my mother, for my sister, for everything that had been taken from me over the years, simmered beneath my skin, making it impossible to breathe without feeling suffocated. As the weeks passed, I made no attempt to reconcile with my family. I avoided their calls, ignored their messages, and stayed away from the house as much as possible. Lily, ever the golden child, seemed completely oblivious to the damage her mother had caused, or perhaps she chose to ignore it. The silence between us was deafening, and yet, every time I thought about reaching out, my heart tightened. I could never go back to being the person I was before. The one who stood quietly in the shadows, waiting for scraps of love. No, I had changed. The truth had shattered everything I had believed to be true about myself and my family. One evening, after another long, sleepless night, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, staring at the reflection of someone I no longer recognized. The woman looking back at me was strong, determined, but also tired, so incredibly tired. For years, I had been playing the part of a dutiful daughter, hiding behind the mask of someone who didn't care about being overlooked. But now, that mask had cracked, and I realized that I had spent my entire life chasing validation that would never come. My mother had given Lily everything, and I had been left with nothing but empty promises and the quiet ache of feeling unwanted. I couldn't let them get away with it.
I knew that now.
My mother had built her life on the back of my sacrifice, using me as a safety net whenever she needed help, but never once appreciating the weight I carried for her. And Lily, who had always been the recipient of my mother's love and affection, had played her part in this game, blind to the fact that the foundation of their relationship was built on my support. I had never asked for much, just to be seen, just to be loved in the same way. But now, I realized that what I had been seeking was nothing but an illusion. I wasn't going to let them get away with taking everything from me, without even so much as a thank you. I wasn't going to sit quietly by while they reaped the rewards of my hard work. The next step was clear. I had to take action. The will was a key piece of the puzzle, but it wasn't enough. I needed more. I started going through old documents, gathering every receipt, every bank statement, every record of the sacrifices I had made for them over the years. There were moments, so many moments, where I had stepped in, silently taking on burdens that should never have been mine. I had paid for my mother's medical bills when she couldn't afford them. I had covered Lily's tuition when she'd spent every penny of her allowance, without thinking twice. And most of all, I had kept the house running, paying bills, managing repairs, all while my mother and sister lived their lives without ever truly acknowledging what I was doing for them. The more I dug, the more I uncovered. It wasn't just the financial sacrifices, either. There were memories I had locked away for so long, moments when my mother had leaned on me, asking for help, but never offering anything in return. I remembered the time when my mother's car broke down on the side of the road and I rushed to help, skipping work and putting off my own plans to save her. Or the time Lily had called me in the middle of the night, stranded at a party, needing me to pick her up. I never complained. I never asked for anything in return. But as I sat there, looking at all the evidence of my years of sacrifice, I realized something. None of it had been appreciated. I had given my time, my energy, my money, all for people who never saw me for who I was. They saw me as a tool, something to be used until I was no longer needed. It was then that I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this slide any longer. I wasn't going to stay silent. My mother and sister had thought they could erase me from their lives without any consequences, but they were wrong. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I would make sure they knew exactly what they had lost when they chose to push me away. I began by reaching out to an attorney. I didn't want to waste time anymore. I knew I had a case built on years of financial manipulation, emotional neglect, and exploitation. The lawyer listened to me, patiently going through the details of the will, the documents I had gathered, and the pattern of behavior that had led me to this point. He assured me that I had a solid foundation for a case, and that I had every right to seek compensation for the years of exploitation I had endured. As the lawyer worked on my case, I began to feel a sense of power that I hadn't felt in years. It was as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I wasn't the same person I had been before. I wasn't the quiet daughter who accepted the crumbs of affection. I was someone who was finally standing up for herself, who was demanding the recognition she deserved. And no matter what happened, I wasn't going to let them take this away from me. The first blow came when my mother called me, pleading for me to drop the case. She promised that she would make things right, that we could go back to being a family, but I knew better now. Her words were empty, just another manipulation to keep me in line. I didn't answer her calls. Instead, I focused on the case, on gathering the evidence I needed to make sure that my voice would finally be heard. As the days passed, the tension between us grew. I knew that my mother and sister were starting to feel the weight of their actions. They began to reach out to me, trying to salvage what they could, but it was too late. The damage had been done. I had spent years bending over backward for them, and now it was my turn to take control. They had taken everything from me without even realizing it, and I wasn't going to let them continue to live in their bubble of self-righteousness. I had been the one who held everything together, and now I was taking it all back. The truth had come to light, and there was no turning back. But even as I moved forward, even as I gathered the strength to face them, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The pain, the betrayal, the sense of being used, it all weighed heavily on me. But there was a small voice deep inside that still yearned for the love I had always wanted from them. I had done everything for them, given everything, and yet it still wasn't enough. The wound they had caused in me was deep, and no matter how hard I tried to move on, it lingered, a constant reminder of everything I had lost. And so, as the case progressed, I was faced with a choice. I could continue down this path, seeking justice, or I could let go of the past, let go of the hurt, and move on. It was a difficult decision, but one that I knew I had to make. The weight of everything I had carried for so long was finally starting to lift, but I didn't know if it would ever be enough to heal the scars that had been left behind. As I prepared for the next step, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen when everything came to a head. What would my mother and sister do when they realized that I wasn't going to back down? What would they say when they found out that I wasn't the one they could continue to manipulate, to control? The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let them have the last word. The truth was mine to tell, and I was ready to make sure that they would finally hear it. The days that followed were a slow march towards something inevitable, a confrontation I had long been avoiding. I could feel the tension building, like the storm before a crash. My mother and sister had no idea what was coming, no inkling of the truth I had uncovered. But I had made up my mind. I wasn't just going to expose the lies. I was going to make them face the consequences of what they had done to me, and this time, I wasn't going to apologize for it. As the legal process moved forward, the cracks in my family's facade began to widen. My mother, ever the master of manipulation, tried every trick in the book to get me to stop. Pleas of let's talk it out, fake promises of change, and even guilt-laden reminders of how much I owed to them. It was pathetic, really. Each phone call, each message, each attempt to reach out only strengthened my resolve. I didn't owe them anything, least of all an explanation. They had taken from me for years, and now it was time for me to take something back. I couldn't avoid them forever, though. There came a moment when the pressure became too much. It wasn't about seeing them or hearing their excuses anymore. It was about the fact that they had finally come to terms with the reality of what they had done to me, and that scared them. The truth had a way of doing that, shattering illusions and leaving everything exposed. They weren't the perfect family anymore. They were just two people who had used and discarded me, and now the whole world was about to know it. One afternoon, I found myself standing outside my mother's house again. The air was thick with the weight of everything that had transpired, but I was calm, more calm than I had been in years. There was no anxiety, no uncertainty. I had already made peace with the fact that I was going to lose everything I thought I had ever known. The house, the memories, the years spent trying to prove my worth. None of it mattered anymore. What mattered was the future I was building for myself, the future where I wasn't defined by their expectations, their demands, or their neglect. I was finally free. When my mother saw me standing there, she didn't immediately rush to hug me, like I had imagined 1,000 times. No, this time, she looked at me as if I were a stranger. A part of me felt that familiar pang of longing, the desire for her approval, but I buried it deep inside. There was no going back now. The woman I had once tried so hard to please was nothing more than a shadow of the mother I had idolized as a child. And Lily, well, she was standing there too, as always the perfect daughter, the one who had always done everything right, the one who had always been the apple of my mother's eye. I could see the confusion in her eyes, the shock of realizing that things were never going to be the same again. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, letting the silence stretch between us, thick and heavy. It wasn't my job to explain myself anymore. They had taken that right from me long ago. And so I waited. I waited for them to speak first, for them to acknowledge what they had done, but the words never came. Instead, my mother spoke in the same tone she always had, calm, measured, almost detached, as if she were still the one in control. She tried to explain her actions, telling me how she had always done what was best for me, how Lily needed the support more than I did. The usual excuses, the same tired lines. But they didn't faze me anymore. I had heard them all before, and I wasn't interested in playing the same game. The silence stretched, and finally I spoke. I wasn't angry, not really. I wasn't looking for a fight, either. I just wanted them to understand that I had seen through the charade, that I wasn't the same person who had walked out of that house months ago. The anger I had once felt had been replaced with something much stronger, clarity. The more I spoke, the more I realized that they weren't even worth the energy of my fury. They had already shown me who they were. They had already taken from me in every way imaginable. They didn't deserve to be part of my life anymore. When I left that day, I didn't look back. There was nothing to go back to, not anymore. They had taken everything they could from me, and now it was my turn to reclaim what I had lost. But even as I walked away from that house, I couldn't help but wonder what it would mean for me going forward. I had spent so much of my life trying to please them, trying to prove that I was worthy of their love. Now that I knew the truth, I had no idea where I would go or what I would do. But one thing was certain, I would never be the same person again. The next few days were a blur of paperwork and phone calls as I continued to pursue my case. I had no idea what would come of it, but I was done waiting for them to acknowledge the hurt they had caused. If they wanted to live in denial, that was their choice, but I had to move on. The first step was to take back my life, my power, and my future. And if that meant burning bridges with my family, so be it. There was no place for me in their world anymore, not the world they had built on lies and manipulation. As the legal battle continued, I found myself feeling a strange sense of peace. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't trying to fix anything or anyone. For the first time in my life, I was doing something just for me. I was taking back the years I had lost, the years spent trying to live up to someone else's expectations. And with each passing day, I felt the weight on my shoulders lighten. The anger, the resentment, all of it faded into the background. I didn't need to be part of their world anymore. I was carving out my own, one where I was free to be who I truly was. Someone who deserved love, respect, and the freedom to make her own choices. But even as I moved forward, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. It wasn't just the pain of losing my family, it was the realization that no matter how much I tried to move on, they would always be a part of me. The memories, the hurt, the years I had spent in their shadow, they would always be there, lurking in the corners of my mind. And yet, I knew deep down that I had made the right choice. It wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about survival. I had learned the hard way that sometimes walking away is the only way to protect yourself. And as I looked ahead to the future, I knew that I was finally free to start over, to rebuild my life on my own terms. But even as I walked away, I couldn't help but wonder, what would happen when they realized that I wasn't coming back? What would they do when they realized that their world was falling apart without me? The truth was out there now, and there was no turning back. And for the first time, I felt a sense of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could finally heal. But it wouldn't be easy. It would take time, effort, and patience. And most of all, it would take the courage to keep moving forward, no matter what came next.